In the year 1914, there was an explorer whose name was Ernest Shackleton. And he was preparing for an expedition to cross. Somebody had already been to the South Pole, but he was going to cross the entire continent of Antarctica, which is huge. It was something that had never been done. Now imagine, that was only 100 years ago, 106. Nobody'd ever done this. So this was kind of like their version of going to the moon. And it proved to be one of the most dangerous, insanely death-defying adventures in the history of mankind. No kidding. It was an adventure that didn't last for months, which was what they had planned for. And it actually failed because they didn't cross the continent. In fact, they didn't really reach the continent at all. They had to shortfall on an island off the continent. The ice conditions were just way worse than anybody had imagined. But it succeeded in showing the rest of us how strong the human spirit can be. These men endured ice, cold, wind, starvation, performed navigation feats, building feats, sailing feats, virtually unparalleled before or since. The journey lasted 2 years, way past what they had provisioned the ship for. Essentially, 2 years of torture and bravery. That's really what it came down to. They all said the hardest experience they'd ever had in their lives or ever imagined having. Nobody, this is remarkable, despite these unbelievable hardships, the ship sinking, they're making their way back in rowboats. Nobody, beyond reasonable belief, died. Nobody died. All 28 of them lived because of their faith, their leadership, their love, frankly, for each other, their caring for each other. They could never have survived this alone. And their bravery. I have read the book more than once, seen the movie more than once, watched the documentaries more than one, and I still marvel at what they did. I've been in physically difficult circumstances before, very, and I laugh at the difficulties I've experienced when I read or see their adventure. As part of Shackleton's preparation for the journey, he put an advertisement, or as the Brits would say, an advertisement, for the men in the newspaper who would sail the ship, cook the food, work the wood for lifeboats and sheds and new masts if that's necessary, take photographs, navigate, in order to make that ship really run, and in order to do a scientific expedition. It took 28 men. Here's what the advertisement read in the newspaper. Quote, "Men wanted for hazardous journey. Small wages, bitter cold," really tempting, isn't it? "Long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return, doubtful. Honor and recognition in case of success." 5,000 men responded to that ad. They chose 27. There were 28 men because one guy wanted to go so badly that after he was refused, he stowed away on the ship, and it was too late to do anything about it once they were on their way. These men were heroes. It was a crazy adventure at the time. Many people said, "You're nuts." But they were heroes of the first order. What's the point? So are you. So are you as parents. Now I want you to listen to the ad again, but this time listen to it as an ad for parents. I'm going to make a small change at the end. Men and women wanted for hazardous journey. No kidding. Till you have kids, you don't know how hazardous. Small wages, or none. Bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, Unbelievable waves, constant danger, safe return, doubtful. Now the small change. Very little honor and recognition in nearly all cases, if you survive. End quote. I don't know anything more difficult than good parenting. I don't. Well, actually, bad parenting is more difficult. But here you are, learning how. I admire what you're doing a lot. Way to go. New subject. The truth is, or the truths that we teach our children are useless unless they're properly taught, which means with love. And unless properly loved and taught, children strongly tend to repeat the behaviors that work. Now, that doesn't mean work long term, that make them happy and strong. No, that temporarily give them what they want. That's the way a child defines it works. That's why they, in the words of parents who have said this to me uncounted thousands of times, they keep doing things, keep whining, keep being disobedient, keep being irresponsible. Why do they whine? Because we respond to it in so many ways. We give them what they want. If we don't, at the very least, we react emotionally to their whining, which gives them a feeling of power over you. Why do they cry? Same. They get what they want, or they get a feeling of power. Why do they fight with each other? Oh, fighting is just the best. It's like being a gladiator. They get a feeling of power, attention, who's stronger. Sometimes they get what they want. They grab the toy from their sibling. They get a feeling of control. It's like being in the arena and having the entire Roman mob screaming your name. Fighting is just very fun for them. They get a lot of return. Why do they repeat themselves? Say the same things. Parents sometimes say, I have heard this phrase till I want to kill a child. Why do they repeat themselves over and over, demanding what they want? Same again, because they get something from it. We strongly tend to give in to their demands. Why? Oh, to shut them up and to avoid their disapproval. And so, of course, they repeat themselves. How many times have I watched parents just out in a store and the child goes, Mom, 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 Mom. Right about the 13th or 14th time that the child says, Mom, I want to go up to the mother and go, Ma'am, I would like to introduce you to this child who seems to think that you're his mother because he keeps saying your name and you're not paying attention. Or they ask for something while they're in line, or they ask for something at home, and they ask once, nothing, twice, 3, 4 times. When they ask the 8th time, or whatever the magic number of the day is, then they finally get it. So what did the child just learn? All you have to do is ask 8 times. And then you get what you want. We train them to repeat these behaviors that we hate. If you give in ever to these to these behaviors that are not loved, loving, and responsible, you train them to do them. We don't mean to, but we need to see that we do it, or it'll keep happening. An example. I've watched this one more than once. The child says, Mama, can I have a cookie? And Mom says, no, we'll be eating soon. You can have 2 slices of banana, and I'll be happy to get one out and cut the 2 slices for you. Or, see, Mom's giving the child a choice. Children love to have a choice. They don't always like the choices you give them, but they like making them. Or you can just wait until we eat, and at the conclusion of the meal, if you eat your meal, then you can have a cookie. So you have 2 choices, but you can only make one of them. So having a cookie now is not one of the 2 choices. Do you see how clear this is? It's clear, it's calm, it's firm, it's loving, and they understand, but they won't if you let them keep repeating themselves. So then the child whines, it's not fair. I want a cookie. So Now the child has said it twice. Why does the child whine? Because it's always worked in the past. That's why we train them to whine. They whine, and then we give in. So they go, okay, if that's what I have to do to get what I want, whine, I will. Then they increase the volume and the tone, and they learn, and then I'll get what I want. So often they just start off with whining at the highest volume, and you give in, and they go, it works. I trained my parents well. But this mom, the one in the story, has taken the ridiculously effective parenting training. So this mother is prepared. She says, she repeats, but just once, you have two choices. Banana, now, cookie, later. Calm, beautiful, not giving in. If a child doesn't get something from a behavior, it does tend to go away. Actually, almost universally goes away. And that's the first principle of how to stop a repetitive behavior. You give them choices, but you don't give in to the whining. In fact, if they whine, they don't get what they're whining for. Now, on to the second. The child waits a few minutes and then returns and says, surprise, Mama, can I have a cookie? And they look at you with those little eyes like, because otherwise I'll die. Pay attention, because this is key. This is the second way to stop the repetition of a behavior. So mom says, what did I tell you before? She doesn't repeat it. She doesn't keep repeating herself, which is just nagging and a little dumb. The child looks from side to side and says, I call it just the almost classic universal stock answer for a child to the first question. She says, what did I tell you before? I don't know. It's that common. And they look bewildered. Mother, I don't know what you're talking about. You said before? Is that like a conversation we had in another lifetime? Their jaw slightly is open, slack-jawed. They're almost drooling. They look so stupid. It's like, you told me before something? They're classic. They're great. They learned this stuff, by the way, from us. Because then they're not responsible for remembering or doing. And because they succeed in making you repeat it, pay attention to that part. By their acting like they don't know what you're talking about, they make you say it over again. So they've trained you to nag, trained you to nag and nag and nag, and then you train them to whine. Are you getting the crazy training here? And then they end up getting what they want anyway. Somehow this isn't working. Nobody likes it. But you see, this mother doesn't care. She doesn't fall for that. She says, no, that's not true. That you don't know. You do know. So what did I say? And then she just closes her mouth and stands there. The child finally hangs his head and says, you said no. Mom says, not quite. I didn't just say no. What else did I say? And the child hangs his head again and says, banana now or cookie later. The kid was listening the entire time. But they've been fooling us all these years and we keep falling for it. Mom says, right. So you can still choose one of those if you'd like. No punishment, no anger. You get one of two choices. And the child chooses banana now. And the child got 2 slices of banana. So so what is it's clearly stated, the second principle in stopping repetition? Children learn a principle far better if they say it in their words. Why? Well, they tend to own it because they said it. They said it. It came out of their mouths. It's part of them now. They tend to believe it because they said it. You think that's not a fact? Walk into an absolutely filthy room and then say to the child, so you are going to clean your room. They look at you with the motions of a chicken looking for food. I did. And I swear to you, the child who says, I did, means it. They look, they don't even see the mess. They think that if they say a thing, it's true. Well, it works the other way too. So if they say a thing that's not true, they think that's true. But if they say the true principle that you taught them, they tend to believe that more also. Why else do they do it? Because when they make you repeat yourself, you look weak and stupid and easy to manipulate. That's not fun to see, but it's true. Then they can dismiss and discount you. You can't be a parent if they make you behave any certain way. If you just react to them, you're not a parent. You're an object to them to be used. Bottom line, explain something to a child once. The second time, you require that they say it. It's not complicated, and it's very effective in helping a child stop a behavior that is hurting them. This is all for them. This isn't to make your life easier, although it really does. Like I said at the top of this particular segment, there's just almost nothing more difficult than being a good parent, except being a bad one. That's a lot of work. It's endless nagging and yelling and frustration. And once you learn from the parenting training, for example, how to love and teach a child, you discover that, yeah, it still worked, but it's way easier than the other stuff. That's a drag. New subject. This woman says, I have adopted my grandson. This is unusual already. So we have a grandmother instead of a parent who was exposed to drugs while his mother was pregnant with him. Not a rare thing. He is very hyperactive with constant yelling, throwing things, tantrums. He's 3.5. Up until about age 2, he was just fine. But this behavior is getting worse and worse. Do you have any suggestions? Now, before I say another thing, when people hear my child has ADHD or my child was affected by drugs in utero, whenever we hear a dramatic event, we tend to attribute all that person's subsequent behavior to the single dramatic event. Wrong. Nearly every time a child behaves badly, it's because of a lifetime of not feeling unconditionally loved. And that causes them pain that just literally distorts the structure and function of their brain. That's been proven. It's the lack of love that hurts them. That's called PCSD, post-childhood stress disorder, much like PTSD, post-traumatic. Well, it is traumatic, but it's their whole childhood. So remember that and don't get distracted too much by this drug business, and we're going to keep talking about it. The National Institute on Drug Abuse, which knows a fair bit about, drugs and kids, has studied this extensively. And they say that children who have been exposed before birth to illicit drugs might be, and they used this word repeatedly, at risk of later behavioral and learning difficulties. They say that the effects are subtle, and they list the potential symptoms from being exposed to drugs when they're in utero. And the list of symptoms is exactly the same as the list of symptoms for ADHD. No kidding. So how do you separate the two? You don't have to. Turns out they're the same disease. Oh, and I strongly suggest that you look at Unit 16 on this Loving Parents Live Facebook page, the one you're watching right now, because I make it very clear that it's very likely, as in very, very likely, that nearly all kids who are diagnosed with ADHD actually suffer from the lack of unconditional love in their lives, or PCSD, which is all about love. So the lack of love explains almost all kids who are diagnosed as ADHD and almost all kids who are exposed to illicit drugs. The most prominent factor in any child's life, other than being born with no brain, for example. That happens. It's due to love or not love. In short, what am I saying? In medicine, I was in medicine for 20 years. When the symptoms of two diseases are exactly the same, almost invariably, we discover that they're the same disease or variants of the same disease. And the same is true here. These kids who are exposed to drugs before birth do experience like withdrawal symptoms. But see, that's a whole different disorder. They withdraw from drugs because they've been exposed to them for a long time, just like their mothers go through withdrawal when they stop using drugs. And their behavior can be abnormal immediately after birth, in the days, possibly weeks after birth. But it doesn't continue. Withdrawal doesn't go on and on. And I've been in narcotics withdrawal hundreds of times, so I know a bit about this. But to the grandmother with the question, that is not the case with the child you're raising. These aren't symptoms that appeared immediately and then lasted for days or a couple of weeks. By your own account, he was okay at age 2, with symptoms increasing since then. That is entirely consistent, most consistent, in fact, with the symptoms that most kids have, who are reacting to the pain of insufficient real love in their lives. Not making this up. It's in books all over the place. The National Institutes on Drug Abuse even say that the symptoms of kids who are exposed to drugs in utero might be due to other factors, like, and they said, the influence of the mother's behavior. Nobody in science or psychiatry or psychology ever dares use the L word. It's almost like it's against the law and they'll throw you out. But that's called love. The influence of the mother's behavior, whether the child feels loved or not. That's the only thing that matters. It's not whether the mother stirs cake with their left hand or her right hand. It's not that behavior. So what I'm really saying is there's no reason at all to treat this kid as though he has a special problem. He needs to be loved just like any other kid does. And I've seen such kids who are labeled as brain damaged because of blank or ADHD or whatever. And I've seen them respond beautifully to just love alone. Don't give him a label. Don't do it. Don't send him to school with a label of exposed to drugs when he was in his mother's womb. Oh, he'll be in special classes till he's dead, when you just can learn how to love him. Take the parenting training, learn how to love him. If he gets a label, it will follow him for life, and it will tend to change the way you treat him. There would already be a tendency to find him inconvenient because you didn't plan on this kid. So clearly one of your kids had this kid, or the spouse of one of your kids had this kid, and suddenly you've got a child when that was not your plan at age 45 or 50 or whenever it was. So it makes it more difficult for you to gladly accept this child and to unconditionally love the child. That's just a fact that it would be more difficult. I'm not saying you don't love your child. But if you were loving your child unconditionally, the odds that this child would be screaming and throwing things, in your words, constantly are very, very low. Very. And it's not your fault. You didn't know what you were doing. Very likely didn't know what you were doing with your child, who brought this child into the world while using drugs. Getting my point? And there's no blaming there. You did your best. Now we just elevate our best. So keep learning about real love. It's going to take a lot of practice. Keep coming back here to this Facebook Live page. Ask other parents what they've done with a child who behaves in a certain way. Not ask them what to do with a child who's been exposed to drugs while in the womb. That's not the problem. So once again, what is the problem that most children experience all over the world of all ages? In fact, same problem most adults experience, who behave in ways that are unproductive and harmful to themselves and others. The fact that they didn't get the essential ingredient that they just had to have when they were little kids. They weren't loved, and so their souls did not grow. They're crippled, and their unproductive behaviors are a natural result of them being in pain and crippled. So of course they behave badly. And we parents, we adventurers in the world, can learn how to make a difference. We'll see you tomorrow.